Welcome. We are in a joint session today. Our check lead team is joined by Mezmo. I am Sarah. I am a senior PMM at Checkly. I've been here for about 2 years, and I'm currently based in Belgrade in Serbia. And I'm joined by Maria from Chuckley, and we also have Rishan and Norman from Mezmo. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Norman. I run business development over here at Mezmo, mostly focused on partnerships and ecosystem. Happy to be here and excited to talk about telemetry with you guys.
Awesome. And I'm Rishan. I'm a product manager here at Mezmo. I've been here for about a year. Very excited to be here. Very excited about working with Checkly. We're passionate about a lot of the same things. So it was fun doing this together.
Yeah, same here. So I'm Maria. You may know me from previous webinars. I'm a product manager here at Checkly and responsible for our observability offering and also our Playwright integration. So excited to be here.
Thank you all. A quick note on housekeeping. In case you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section. And we are recording this session. So in case you need to jump out earlier or want to double check anything, we are going to be sending the recording to your inbox. A quick note on what we'll be covering today. So the current state of telemetry, why it needs a rethink, what we think good telemetry could look like. Then some best practices around telemetry, and at the end, we're going to do a demo of an optimized telemetry pipeline.
Aaron, do you have a question? You can use the Q&A for that. I see a raised hand.
Oh, all right. Thanks for noticing that. Yeah, just a few pieces of information around checklists. So we are pioneering monitoring as code, recognized by Gartner. We're also a Gartner Cool vendor. We have more than 1,100 customers, including CrowdStrike, Vercel, LinkedIn, Render, and many others. We are a Series B startup, fully remote. Our colleagues are all over the world. And we are enterprise ready and backed by some of the best VCs. So Checkly is an app reliability platform. It's built for modern development, and we want to enable faster issue detection, communication, and resolution, thanks to a clear signal through monitoring as code. So monitoring as code would let you automate monitor management as part of your software development lifecycle. You would be able to create, manage, and update monitors directly from your code base using our CLI. And that means that you would shift monitoring left. It would be closer to your engineering. And engineers have better visibility of the performance and uptime of the code that they ship. And finally, when something goes wrong, you would get a single clear signal from your checks. So you have synthetic monitors to detect a problem, and then when something's detected, you also get a trace that pinpoints exactly what went wrong. I am going to hand it over to Norman to introduce the Mezmo platform.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Mezmo, we've actually previously were called a company called LogDNA, so we're very familiar with sort of the observability space and have been in this space for about 9 years, actually, understand the challenges. And when we first started, we had really focused specifically on developers and the developer experience. Part of the reason why we had built a logging solution at the time was just to build something that people didn't have to spend a lot of time configuring. It should be easy out of the box. And as we continued doing business, one thing we realized was that a lot of our customers sort of had the same request. They really loved sort of the auto magic part of what we were doing, where we were automatically being able to help them control, identify the log space and the events that they were getting. And we've shifted over time. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we've shifted over into sort of a more telemetry pipeline type of platform, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we talk more about it. But a lot of good customers, we've been around for a long time. Compliance and security are a really big deal for us. We're globally located in terms of where we are, and very excited to sort of tackle telemetry problems and observability problems as they scale, especially this day and age with how applications are growing and how application platforms are growing as well. Next slide. And so one thing I wanted to just talk about is we are focused on both telemetry pipeline. We also have sort of a log management backend to what we're doing, but our fundamental approach isn't just about observability anymore. It's about how we can optimize telemetry data and help you scale in the future. And some of the principles that we believe fundamentally are helping you understand, helping you optimize, and helping you respond to the data that you're getting as in scale. And these things don't have to happen sequentially. They can actually happen in multiple different orders. Sarah had talked about shifting sort of monitoring to the left, and we fundamentally believe in some of those things too, that you don't have to wait until data gets to a very downstream platform to be able to help you manage the data itself. And so, number one, from the core principle side of it, is understanding the data is super important, how to profile the data, how to identify the data itself. A lot of the customers that we work with today have a hard time just even understanding or knowing the data that's coming through. And that's understandable. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of noise, and you may just be searching for a needle in the haystack most of the time. And a lot of times the rest of the data that's coming through, you're not really even paying attention to. So helping you understand that, helping you optimize that, so being able to reduce that, and we'll talk about some of the best practices later on, reduce, enrich, and simulate the changes in the data, helping you understand the changes that are happening as you're adding applications, as you're adding new services is really important. And then lastly, be able to understand, optimize, and then respond to that data, being able to put that into downstream systems, whether that's alerting, whether that's sampling, whether that's providing thresholds, or whether that's providing signals to downstream systems faster to help you respond to that data, to identify things, to reduce MTTR, and all those things that people are generally searching for in sort of a magical solution within telemetry data and observability is what we're focused on helping customers with today.
All right, thank you, Norman. So just to dive into the challenges of modern telemetry today, we know that apps are complex, and when something goes wrong, you really want to get the answer to two questions. So has something really failed? And then why did it fail? So telemetry should be able to answer these questions, but right now we're facing with a lot of data and not that much clarity. And then instead of helping you move faster, you often get drowned in noise and false positives. Why we think telemetry needs rethinking. So the first one, data overload, we just mentioned that. It can add mental load when resolving an issue and reduce clarity. And also, it skyrockets costs. And then also it can affect decision making. So the second one would also be alert fatigue. A lot of alerts cause burnout among engineers and SREs just because you really need to know what you need to pay your attention to. Then a lot of data is hard to handle, which causes scalability issues. And finally, it's not just about the alerts, but also about context, like where do you need to pay your attention to?
Yeah, that's a good point, Sarah. Just to add to that, and I'll touch upon this a little bit later, but to be practical about it, a lot of the customers that we're seeing today, what's bringing them to the table is the cost of it. It's easy to just implement these solutions out there today, but as you're getting these more automated platforms, as you're building things on things like platforms like Kubernetes, all these microservices are going on. the exponential growth of this telemetry data, oftentimes when you're collecting it, it can be a very high item on the list of things that you're paying for. Right below the infrastructure, you have observability costs. And so we see that a lot, and we'll touch upon that a little bit more on where, what our perspective is as well.
Yeah, totally. I think talking with customers, I've seen both often. Like one is, okay, costs are skyrocketing on telemetry data because that's what traditional vendors were intending to do. And the other one is, okay, yeah, I'm getting all of this data, but how do I know of all of these, which one is the relevant, right? Which is the noise that you were both alluding to. Like it is very real for sure.
Yeah, and it's so hard to get to the data that you actually need. So you get buried in dozens of alerts across multiple dashboards, and then with all the noise, also engineers tend to tune out alerts, and that's when actual problems go unnoticed. So this is how we think great telemetry could look like. The first one is, again, signal over noise. Just because you need the relevant data. You don't need to have large amounts of data that you are not going to use. Then you also need end user context. So you need insights into user experience and behavior. Then we also think that telemetry should be scalable and flexible, ideally programmable, which means that it could adapt to changing needs and infrastructure. It could reduce the cognitive load, and it could help engineers focus on what's really important. And then finally, fast resolution. So detecting an issue is like 50% of the job, but then you also need to resolve it. And then if you would get a trace with the exact problem that happened, and if you could just go there immediately, that would help you fix an issue really fast, which is exactly what we do at Checkly. Checkly has a unified approach to ensuring application performance and reliability. Our platform has 4 modules. The first one is testing, meaning you can catch bugs before they even hit production using Playwright, and you can do this right from your CI/CD. And then these tests, you can use them as monitors to proactively monitor your UI and API. Then, if something fails, you should be able to resolve issues quickly with full stack traces, which is exactly what we're talking about today. And these traces would pinpoint exactly what went wrong. So you would skip all the data browsing. And finally, when an issue happens, you also want to communicate it. So we provide alerts and status pages to help you communicate issues to internal and external customers as well, and do this in a clear and accurate way. But we are here to talk about traces today. So I'm going to hand it over to Maria to discuss traces in depth and to show us how it works. I think you're muted.
I was. Okay, so for those of you that may not be familiar with Checkly, of course, what we're doing is running synthetic checks at a schedule. These are based on Playwright. So every 5 minutes, every minute, as frequent as you need. We even have 1 second launched now, in case you're a big enterprise, just know that it's there. So yeah, as frequently as you need, we're running these monitors from different locations around the world to ensure that your critical flows are running. When this request is made against your website, if you have and are hitting an instrumented application, backend, or services underneath, it will receive our headers, the traces state that you can see in there, checkly true, and it will propagate those headers across this system, which is your backend application and services, as I was pointing out to, and then send those over back. One of the things that I see customers struggle with when they're sending these back is that configuring the open telemetry collector is painful or hard because there is a different team managing this. It's hard to get visibility into what goes in, what comes out, and how all of these works. And this is where Mezmo can be very, very helpful, right? So you pipe things into Mezmo and then distribute the ones that have the Checkly header toward Checkly. So then whenever you get the failure alert, and this is my really, really pet peeve about this feature, the check run will alert you, okay, your checkout flow has failed. And the first thing that you see sometimes is that there has been a timeout and something errored. And suddenly the traces and the spans are just right there and they're telling you, you had a timeout because there was a 403 on this key and maybe it needs updating. And then your team quickly knows how to fix it. And then your time to resolution gets fixed really, really quickly. So, and this is what we're all about, right? Making sure that you can tweak the volume, do the right filtering, and make sure that you get the data that you need with Checkly and also the one that you need elsewhere, which is where Mezmo comes in.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Maria. I think even if you're just talking about implementing this on your own, sometimes the fact that you have to go, sort through a bunch of traces, even if it's just 100 traces, right? I'm not even talking about the thousands, hundreds of thousands that are actually coming in from your machine, your machines and applications. You have to spend the time to go figure out what that looks like, and that's incredibly difficult at the scale that you're looking at to be able to pinpoint that and then configure your open telemetry node. Not that people aren't doing it today, it just becomes a very cumbersome task if you're doing this across all of your applications with multiple different checks and multiple different tests. And that's where we foresee needing a solution. But just to then segue into kind of what we're doing, there isn't really a magical solution when it comes to managing this stuff. Everybody's application platforms are different. The way they test, the way they log, the way they generate traces and metrics, it's all different. And so helping it, understanding what the best practices around telemetry and data hygiene are incredibly important to understand. So you can scale this as your application, as your teams scale, as you have teams within whether the SREs or devs that are managing some of this, they need to have the tools, stability to be able to manage this as this grows and grows. It's not there's no kind of one size fits all, but be able to have a tool that helps you control that data is incredibly important. Uh, and then something that I'll also emphasize in the next slide is that, it all sort of boils down to, at the end of the day, the cost of managing telemetry data and observability data is increasing faster than the value you're getting. Today, what you're seeing is most of these systems, and we're even as a log management provider, we're guilty of this as well, is that we're essentially charging you per volume, right? Because as you're getting more observability data, you're linearly storing this data as well, and the cost of that is linearly growing with the volume that's occurring. And so what you're seeing though is that the value that you're getting out of it does not increase linearly with the cost of it. And where you're seeing the value sort of just drop off and dip off, you're seeing the cost increase. And so that's something we're really trying to help. Digital enterprises generate a ton of data, and given with how solutions are being built today, whether it's through a lot of the new AI stuff and things are getting automated out, that's just going to continue growing. And we're seeing growth in that across the organizations that we're working for. And then when you're thinking about more specifically in this example that we're showing, traces especially balloon in size because there's not a real limitation where you're just having a log line. You're kind of throwing as much data in there as possible to help you resolve. So you sort of have conflict in those two sides.
Yeah, that's exactly where Checkly Traces offering makes the most sense, or how we've ideated it, right? Like we're not focused on volume on people sending us everything. We just want what's related to your synthetic checks. So in most cases, if you have a synthetic check and you have a synthetic check that detects your issues earlier, right? And before your customers notice, your spans are right there before your customer notices, and then there is no volume even generated. Like I've seen some customers consider enriching Grafana even,
Yeah,
which is really
that's right.
interesting to see. But yeah, given that trust, and I think this is where, to me, Mezmo feels really cool. Losing track of that and not seeing what you're might be missing out on is what's scary, right? Like, what if within all of these piles of boxes of data that I have in my backyard, I have something that is relevant and important for my team. And this is where you can see it with the pipelines that you're providing for sure.
That's right. And I think traditionally when people have thought about it, people are often trying to understand more. And the way that they've done that in the past, honestly, is to get more data and find more tools that then again suck in more data to provide some of these insights. And so being able to start thinking about how you can control that in the front end is incredibly important. We don't want observability to become a tax that you're paying for, right? Today, as observability grows and your signal to noise ratio is quite a bit off, you're really paying a tax on the data that's being brought in. And you're not really paying for observability, you're paying for the exhaust of your infrastructure of maintaining the stuff and ballooning in size. And so I'm going to pass it over to Rishi, and he's going to talk about some of the best practices, and then we'll move on to really cool demo between Mezmo and Checkly.
Right. So what does it look like when cost scales with value? I liked what Maria said, boxes in the backyard. I'm a bit of a hoarder myself. I keep a lot of things around because one day I might need it. Even really small things. I just moved. I brought so much Velcro from my old place because I might need to manage my cable setup in my new place. And I'm storing all this stuff, but really at the end of the day, it'd probably be better for my peace of mind and more cost effective for me to just buy it if I need it, right? And I think that's where the mindset should be around telemetry. There is signal in your telemetry data. That's why we collect all of these things. But we're paying to store and retain and index so much more than that. And when we look at that in practice with our customers, like we routinely get to like 40, 50% reduction in volumes. And there's some best practices you can do to really be stringent with like how you're filtering and really learn whether that telemetry data you're sending downstream and storing is really needed. I mean, the first is like to filter noise early. I think there's like two buckets for telemetry data that you can afford to be picky about. The first bucket is telemetry data that you may never need, or you may only need like during an incident. There's no business for you to be sending that telemetry data downstream all of the time. If it's in a normal state, you should probably only be sending the telemetry data that you need to diagnose an issue, right? And that's why we really love Checkly, because that's what Checkly is trying to push forth as well, right? These are the essential checks for your critical flows, and that's what you need to diagnose whether an issue is occurring before it even occurs with the customer. So that's like the one bucket of data, and that goes for traces as well as logs, as well as metrics. There are some things that you need during a normal state, and you can send those. But for the large majority that you're keeping just in case, you can afford to be a lot more picky about. The other interesting thing is enriching data. It's so distributed with so many microservices and depending on which other third parties you're using. Um, Downstream, you can have a lot more value to your telemetry data if you use pipeline as a control plane to really enrich it with context of where it's coming from, whether that's timestamps or if you want to tag what team is responsible for a certain amount of telemetry data, and really enrich that to really reduce that mean time to resolution. That's also something you can do to add more value for around the same volume in pipeline. And that's all like easier said than done, you know. It's a large volume of data and you really need to understand it. And that's why like one of the biggest priorities like we have at Mezmo when we're working with customers is to really understand that data. Um, and those last 2 points there, like as I said, like your needs during a normal state versus an incident versus a deployment, or if you have a surge that's caused by a crash loop, they're all different. So this pipeline has to be dynamic. Like there are filtering mechanisms that occur downstream and observability platforms. They're all very static. That you can't really have it update dynamically to what your current system needs are. And realistically, as an SRE team, as a platform team, you want that to update dynamically. And of course, both of us very big fans of open telemetry, having that standardized data format. So that's actually something you can do if you're working with someone that's not OTel friendly. You can map fields into OTel format or whatever format you prefer for whatever destination might be best fit downstream. Next.
I do believe that everyone will start. We're seeing the trend, right? Like everyone is starting to offer open telemetry protocols, and if sadly somebody is still on an old SDK standard that is proprietary, the fact that you can hop with this is very useful, right? Because not always you can upgrade those old PHP or Oracle SDK machines to actually start piping data in the format that you need it.
Exactly, whichever third-party vendors you may be using.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
feel the pain. We have a lot of customers that are still using syslog and unwilling to get off.
You tell Windows XP people, it's there for a reason.
Yeah, so I guess we could go a little bit into like what this looks like in practice. What are strategies we use with our customers that have been very effective? I mean, the first is filtering, like as I said. There's this dynamic between like platform teams, SREs, and like the developers, where developers will create logs, create traces. Well, less so with traces because instrumenting those is a little more work, but definitely with logs where they'll instrument this telemetry data just in case we might need it. It might be handy at a firefight at 2 a.m. And it's very hard to say no to that. But in reality, what we end up seeing is that close to like 40% of this data isn't even queried on downstream. So one, doing like a really deep look into your data to know whether any of it is actual like junk. So removing duplicate logs, duplicate like trace data, being a little more intelligent about what you are sending downstream in the first place, is one of the biggest contributors to reducing volume. In the case of traces, it's really interesting. It's a little tougher to make informed decisions on those. But we've been experimenting out with like tail-based sampling, if any of you are familiar with that. So being able to look at the contents of a trace in stream, because at the end of the day, the traces that you want are the ones that have errors or have latency, and you end up paying for the volume of the other 90% of traces as well. And that kind of what sampling intelligently is about. You're going to have more critical areas of your app that you want more higher fidelity data for, and you'll have less critical areas of your app that you may need less fidelity data for. So that's where sampling intelligently comes in. And intelligent routing is more than just being a little more strict about what you send downstream. It's also about like having the freedom to use multiple vendors. Whether you want to convert logs to metrics, because that's an easier way for you to diagnose issues. You can convert logs to metrics, send it to a low-cost metric storage, use whichever tool you'd like to choose. And you can use that to diagnose issues and have your pipeline respond to whenever an issue occurs. So you can send full fidelity data to whichever platform you prefer to resolve an issue. And a new interesting trend that we've been seeing is sometimes if you need to diagnose an issue, you don't even need to pay for that retention downstream. A lot of times in practice, in stream, you can set those alerts to pull those alarms and have your pipeline respond dynamically in a way where you can ensure you have all the data you might need to resolve the incident after the fact. Next slide. So there's a couple of things we do here at Mezmo to really make this easy. Like as I said at the start, telemetry data is often like a black hole. It's a weird dynamic where the ones creating the telemetry data aren't the ones managing it. So a big tool that we use is our data profiler when working with our customers. And that lets you like slice and dice your data from any source, any subset, any service, and really get a deep look into what that data looks like at any point in time. The any point in time part is very interesting because your data looks very different when you're having a surge versus having an incident versus being in a normal state. So being able to see what that data looks like in those different situations and being able to make calls on whether something's needed or if it is needed, whether you can sample it or if you do want to make it a metric when you're not in an incident, but collect full fidelity for resolution, once that flag is raised, you can also do that. But it really all comes down to understanding whatever that subset of data is, and then being able to make those decisions informed based on that. Next slide. And kind of like the meat behind this, like only sending the data you need when you need it. That's like a really important part, right? The when you need it. And that's when responsive pipelines are become very critical to these workflows. If you have static rules, you're going to either over-index or under-index. You're either going to keep way too much data because you might need it in some situations, or you're not going to keep enough, and that's going to hurt you when you're having an incident, right? So with responsive pipelines, you can adjust based on detected conditions. So you saw that Checkly has integrations with like PagerDuty. If one of your synthetic traces has an error, that check fails, you can set an alert to have a responsive pipeline to, let's say, have full fidelity logs captured from that particular service. And you don't have to have the entire pipeline respond to that either. You could have literally just the logs from that service come in with full fidelity, even with buffer playback on that.
Yeah, I think that's the nice part about integrating as a source or a destination. I think we call it import or exporting from our end, right? In which you can export the root span, like the header of the trace, toward external services, and that contains the check result data that, as you're saying, that can be used to then say, okay, collect more logs for this thing and store those because I might need them. And the same way, this information then, yeah, the spans are the ones that we can receive to have all of the information for the responder team to say, okay, this is wrong because it failed here. Yes, I got it. So yeah, I like this.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, you need it when you need it, right? But that doesn't mean you have to pay for the storage, the indexing the other 90% of the time. So really having that
Well,
flexibility.
yeah. Imagine
Mhm.
that you could have your Velcros stored somewhere
Exactly.
where they wouldn't occupy any space and just being pulled whenever you need them for cables.
Like a genie in a bottle. Just snap your fingers and
Yeah.
Yeah, and like if you go back to the curve, I mean, that's effectively what it is, right? Like if you're getting all of the data you need when you need it, and you're not sending the data when you don't need it, your costs are scaling directly with the value you're getting out of that data. And that's the paradigm that we're really trying to push, giving the tools to be flexible with that. And I think Checkly like agrees, because you don't need to have all these real user traces to understand when a failure is occurring in one of your critical flows. You can have whatever is needed to diagnose that issue, and then you can turn to the rest of your telemetry data to help resolve it if you need additional context.
Indeed.
Awesome. Next slide. So this is what the architecture kind of looks like. Taking a step back, telemetry pipelines, they sit in between your data sources and your different data destinations. And as I said, like the flexibility is kind of like that key tenet here, being able to choose from a variety of sources and a variety of destinations, that are best fit for your needs in that current moment. So whether you need one tool to diagnose an issue, like you do with Checkly, um, you can have those particular tools integrated with the Mezmo pipeline, and you can route whichever data wherever you'd like it intelligently and have that be responsive. I think we can jump into like a quick demo now. I did want to show you all a pipeline. We built one together that we're kind of excited about. So going into here, where are we? Let's see. Let me try that again. Zoom permission troubles. Sorry about that. There we go. Are y'all seeing the pipeline screen?
Yep.
Beautiful. So this would be like a very simple pipeline that anyone could get started with today. We have a demo app from the hotel community. It's an astronomy store, direct to consumer, and of course, has critical flows. We want to make sure checkout is occurring no matter where people are ordering in the world, right? We don't want to lose those customers. Very important for our business. So with Checkly, we could instrument synthetic checks of our checkout flow. But we also have real user traces, and those are really noisy. And we don't really know how to handle that volume in a way where we can be confident in our coverage while reducing the amount of data we're sending. We want less noise. Whatever tracing provider we're using downstream, it's hard to actually know what matters. And frankly, like people are on our case about the budget. We're going through our infrastructure budget. So the first thing we would do in this situation is try and determine what's a Checkly synthetic check, because we know those are very important to us. Those are how we diagnose issues. And what's a real user trace that might have less value in a normal state. So that's where this first processor comes in. All of these traces are coming from the hotel collector. But what's happening in this processor is that in stream, they're trying to identify which one's a Checkly trace that might be a synthetic check that we care a lot about versus what's a real user trace. Maria, do you want to talk a little bit about how that checker works?
Yeah, let me take over sharing the screen. This is going to be a bit of a ping pong, but shall be fun. And yeah, as you can see here, we have 4 checks against these Astor Shop. Check out the homepage and making sure that all of our products are available or running every 5 minutes from 3 different locations. And data ads is every 10 minutes because, you know, we care about advertisements, but we care about people buying more. And what you can see in here is, of course, that the checkout is running from all of these different locations. The last round happened from Frankfurt. And the traces that Mezmo has sent to us are here to identify any errors that may occur. And as we were saying before, and I can show you this here, this is working because when we're making the request towards your website, we're sending the trace state and the trace parent headers that then Mezmo is filtering by, right? And this way things are connected very nicely. And I'll hand it over back to Risheng because he can show the rest of the pipe. And
Awesome. So now we're confident all of our synthetic checks we're passing through to Checkly. And any of them fail, we'll get an alert and we feel good that in a normal state, we have like full coverage of our critical flows. But you still want some of your real user traces to identify any other less critical issues. But since they're less critical, you really don't need that full fidelity data and you're paying a lot for them right now, right? So in this pipeline, where anything that's just not a Checkly trace, we're just putting through a sampling processor here. And if you look at those volumes, if we didn't put it through the sampling processor, you'd be at around 500 kilobytes a second. But with just simple 1 in 10 head-based sampling, it's at 50 kilobytes a second. Just taking a
yeah,
step in the simplest way, right? We've gone from 515 kilobytes a second in volume to be confident that we have coverage to having the 5 kilobytes a second from Checkly plus the 50 kilobytes a second from your real user traces. Do you want to
yeah,
add something?
and that's really huge, right? Like we're going to 10 times less or 100 times less in the case of Checkly. And this is the volume, right? Like you don't need the noise. You just need what helps you investigate and resolve faster. Everything else is noise for you, for your team, and money in egress, and in storage. So yeah, I really like how you can see it very clearly here, and that you start with tons of kilobytes a second, then it goes to 5 in Checkly and 50 something on the trace sampling that you have set up. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah, it really is just like whenever you need that data, it should be there. But best practices would be send only what you need to be confident to diagnose an issue until that issue occurs. And that's why we're such big fans of Checkly. If you wanted to trigger an alert in Checkly and have your pipeline respond during an incident, you could change this completely. You could have filtering for your logs as well beforehand that you remove in case of an incident. Same with your trace sampling. So you really have that freedom so that whenever you need that data, you have that data and you can pay for that data. But when you aren't using it, you have that freedom to not send that downstream.
Yeah, it's really funny because some things, and I'll share again the screen on the checkout check that we have. The synthetic check is passing, but of course we do some checks underneath. And one thing that I told Norman right before we joined is that the SVG for the card icon isn't working, and you can actually see it in the traces underneath that the router image provider is not serving it correctly. And sadly, it doesn't have an attribute or an event, so we would actually need to go and look if this one is online or not, because it's clearly not fitting the card icon SVG image. In any case, when this is critical, it becomes urgent, right? Like if this is my company and not the Astor shop from Open Telemetry, I would definitely want to get this fixed proactively and not reactively. And that's also what we're about. So yeah.
Awesome.
I think we have time for some questions now. So if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section.
Also, the chat has been enabled now, right?
I think Aaron had his hand raised. I don't know if there was a question from him that we can help answer.
Yeah, the hand has been raised since the very beginning, so we'll see.
Yeah, we'd be happy to chat about anything.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think one point that I'll just add on to it is it's controversially, I think when we talk about controlling the data, it's not quite to the benefit of a lot of these downstream observability systems, but it is the idea of providing that control back to you. And I think it ends up being the flexibility that we provide for organizations as well, because I think a lot of organizations we work with, they don't really realize the flexibility that they can work with to actually use the data and use it for other use cases and purposes where you're constantly sort of struggling to control, either at an agent standpoint or you're already implemented something and you don't know what to do with it. And so having that flexibility changes the dynamic of what you can do with the data and ultimately sort of brings you more value to it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that control is actually very precious to have, because otherwise you just don't know what you have and what you might need. And yeah. So
All right.
yeah.
Yeah, if we don't have any questions, I will thank you all for participating. It was a great demo. I hope we get that image fixed. And yeah, I'm hoping we can do this again sometime. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
my pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.